welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A. Welcoming back our wonderful Rabbi Tovia Singer. Welcome back, sir. It's a pleasure as usual.
Always. It's always a big pleasure. And it's good to be back. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm going to be all right. I think just going to... I couldn't imagine... I've never had food poisoning before, but I've heard people describe it, and that's what it kind of feels like. And so just real nauseous and not feeling too hot. But it'll pass. It'll pass. So I apologize for getting it started way too late. So we'll make a good show of it, though, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We're full shalema.
Thank you.
Cover it.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us where you're calling from.
Hi there. My name is Alex, and I am from Omaha, Nebraska.
Welcome.
I have a question for the rabbi. My question is regarding Daniel's reaction to Jeremiah's prophecy of a 70-year exile for the Jews in Babylon. Daniel feared that due to their sins, the Jews would have their exile multiplied by 7, turning it into a 490-year exile. He was using the book of Jeremiah and referencing Leviticus 26:18 when he came to this conclusion. My question is, if Daniel had access to the scriptures to come to this conclusion, why didn't he read in Isaiah that Cyrus of Persia would come and destroy the Babylonian Empire? Hope this question makes sense. Thank you very much.
Absolutely wonderful question. All right, that's really a good one. I've always wondered that too because, a lot of Christians, whenever I tell them, the things that I've learned about, Daniel, misunderstanding, and they say, well, that's just the Jewish people saying he didn't understand, because we say they don't understand, they say we don't understand. So kind of looking forward to your answer on this one. Take it away, boss.
Really great question. As it turns out, the opening of the book of Daniel, the prophet conceives that he's sitting there contemplating the calculations of Jeremiah. He is saying he doesn't understand them. So let's try to make sense of what's happening here. This is a very, very sophisticated question, and it's brilliant. Whoever you are, Hashem bless you with a very, very good mind. I'm going to need to explain it, or people are going to get lost. So Daniel 9 is very famous because Christians use it as an apologetic wherein they claim that the book of Daniel contains a prophecy of 70 weeks, which precisely foretells the date of Jesus' crucifixion. Nothing could be further from the truth. And in fact, this whole notion that Daniel 9 could be used as an apologetic for the date of Jesus' crucifixion was a later invention. In fact, it is for that reason that you will not find that time prediction anywhere in the Christian Bible, anywhere in any first century Christian literature. The first Christians to ever even stumble upon Daniel, and a lot had to be manipulated to get their outcome, is in the 2nd century. Irenaeus uses it and so on. The reason why Paul doesn't quote Daniel 9, the reason why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John don't quote Daniel 9. When I say don't quote Daniel 9, I mean the calculation of 70 weeks, which is 490 years. I don't mean any part of Daniel 9, is because no one thought you could possibly use it yet. It was a later Christian invention. And every Christian that uses Daniel 9 in order to defend the Christian religion, in order to sustain and bolster the notion that the crucifixion date was foretold in the Jewish scriptures, in order to do that, it requires a torturous changing of the text. But they have to answer the question, why didn't Paul think this was significant enough to mention? Paul, after all, his letters are consumed with the crucifixion of Jesus, the death of Jesus. That's all Pauline. Mark would have been very happy to use this. They didn't think of it. No one did. So this is a later invention. However, the question asked by this caller is really very, very insightful. You need to listen very, very carefully to even understand the question. So what is going on in Daniel 9? So what happens is there are a number of times in Tanakh when prophets did not understand what was happening around them and why it was happening. I'm going to interrupt the broadcast for a moment. William, I can hear you in my earphones.
Interesting. I'm not talking or anything.
No. Any noise you make, I can hear it. So usually I hear nothing coming from you.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
So if you can mute your mic, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. Yes, sir. Yeah, because you're bothering me and I don't like it. I'm kidding. Okay. So, all right. So as it turns out, we are told right at the outset of the 9th chapter of Daniel that Daniel is contemplating prophecies of Jeremiah, and he tells us that, in fact, he is stating this in the first year of Darius the Mede. Now, if you open a chapter like Daniel 9 and you hear that this is in the first year of Darius the Mede, you might go, all right, the first year of Darius the Mede. That piece of information allows us to understand what is going on in these 27 chapters. The timing. And I'll explain. Listen very carefully. As it turns out, Daniel was contemplating calculations found in Jeremiah. The first one is in Jeremiah 25, verse 12, and the second is in 29, verse 10. Now, these two passages appear very similar, which means they both discuss a 70-year period and essentially a time when Babylon would come to an end. And 29 verse 10 discusses, in fact, the fulfillment of the word of this word of prophecy, and that the Jews will return back to their land. It is almost any person quickly reading these two passages side by side would conclude that they're essentially speaking of the same thing, the same 70-year period. Okay? This is what Daniel did, and this led him to miscalculate the predicament that he was in. What was this predicament? Predicament was very clear. The Babylonian Empire had come to an end. Now that's predicted in Jeremiah 25, verse 12. The context of Jeremiah 25:12. Why is Jeremiah even discussing Babylon? Because Jeremiah was a prophet who lived at the end of the first temple period during the Babylonian Empire, when Nebuchadnezzar had long seized Jerusalem, and the land of Israel, Yerushalayim, was completely a vassal state under Babylon. The Jews were divided in how to deal with this horrible predicament. There were false prophets going around saying, we need to fight the Babylonians, we can regain our independence. And Jeremiah is saying, do not do it for many reasons. God is not on your side. Don't in any way try to fight against Bavel. Bavel is God will not help you. Don't rebel. And another point in this chapter is, as it turns out, Babylon is done in 70 years. The Babylonian Empire would end after 70 years. Historians to this day are pressed to explain how the Babylonian Empire could have fallen. I mean, the Babylonian Empire was the world superpower. It would have been inconceivable for Babylon to fall. And it fell in an instant to the Persian Empire, okay, in a blink of an eye. And to this day, historians are hard-pressed. There's obviously a limited amount of information from the ancient world, hard-pressed to explain this. Now, Daniel presumed that, in fact, the destruction of Babylon following 70 years would also be fulfilled with the prophecy that we find in Jeremiah 29:10, and that is the Jewish people would be restored to this place, meaning restored to Israel. Got it? All right. Now, Daniel, one other caveat, begins the calculation of 70 years from when? When do you start counting it? Well, you start counting it when Babylon first subjugated Jerusalem. Remember, when Jeremiah is articulating these prophecies, the first temple had not yet been destroyed. Jeremiah is pleading with the Jews, don't fight back. Don't fight back so that the temple is not destroyed, so there is not a complete destruction, right? It had not been destroyed. When was the temple, when was Jerusalem subjugated by the Babylonians, by Nebuchadnezzar? It didn't happen when it was destroyed. It actually occurred 18 years prior to the destruction of the first temple. Got it? Nebuchadnezzar becomes a king of Babylon, and Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, emerges 19 years prior to the destruction of the first temple. You must know this history, or you will not understand this prophecy. Okay, 19 years prior to the destruction of the first temple, the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar, emerges. It's the world superpower, like the world had never seen. A year later, Nebuchadnezzar would subjugate Yerushalayim. There would be a series of 3 exiles. It didn't happen in one shot. 18 years later, but it was over the course of time that there were exiles of leaders of the Jewish people until it was ultimately destroyed. Daniel begins his calculation from the time Babylon began and emerged as the world power and when it subjugated Jerusalem a year later. Therefore, he's starting to count essentially 18 or 19 years prior to the destruction of the first temple. Now, this is very important because when the Babylonian Empire was destroyed, so the Persian Empire did not emerge immediately, but rather there was a Median Empire that really only lasted for a few months. Let's say it's roughly the area of about 11 months, not even a year, and then Cyrus emerges. Got it? This is very, very critical because imagine you're Daniel. You have Jeremiah's prophecies in front of you. You presume those are the same 70-year periods, right? The prophecy of the fall of Babylon, articulated explicitly in Jeremiah 25, verse 12, has happened. Darius the Mede, this is not Darius the Persian, that's later. Darius the Mede is now, he's the king. He's going to pass on to Cyrus, but he is the king. So, but something didn't happen. What didn't happen? What did not occur? Whereas that was fulfilled, the Babylonian Empire ceased. What was not fulfilled is the Jews are not going back. Nothing's happening. Imagine the empire is destroyed. This is such a tectonic shift in human history. The Babylonian Empire collapses, and the Jews are still here, and no one's going back. Like, why are we still here in Babylon? That event, the fall of the Babylonian Empire, should have occurred simultaneously with the return of the Jews according to Jeremiah's prophecy. This is what's very, very critical. Now, the question is, why didn't Daniel go, we have nothing to worry about? Because this is the person's question. You have nothing to worry about because there's a prophecy in Isaiah 44, verse 28 and 45:1. Treat that chapter break as completely artificial. 44:28 is the last passage of that chapter. 45:1 is a famous passage. Cyrus is called God's Messiah. Mashiach means anointed for God's purpose. And there we are told that Cyrus is going to give the command to rebuild Jerusalem, to build the temple, and for the Jews to return back to the land of Israel. And in fact, Isaiah 45 is going to continue to explain to everyone, do not question why I would use somebody like Cyrus. You don't understand my ways. Okay? So the question is, Daniel had the book of Isaiah in front of him. In fact, the book of Isaiah was written hundreds of years before Daniel, approximately 2 centuries earlier. Isaiah lived during the Assyrian Empire. So why didn't he look at it? So there's 2 obvious reasons. The clear reason is something that the caller mentioned, and that's the reference to Leviticus chapter 26, in specifically verse 18. Leviticus 26 is known as the Toraah. It's a chapter of blessings and curses. and it's not. It's painful. It's not as painful as another chapter in Deuteronomy 28, which is similar, not the same, but that's much more elaborate. But Leviticus 26 tells us about what will happen to the Jewish people if they are not loyal to Hashem and they continue to sin. And the passage says, if despite this you did not heed me, then I will punish you 7 times for your iniquity. I will multiply the punishment 7 times. Now, listen carefully. If the Babylonian end of the Babylonian Empire would be a 70-year punishment, an exile of 70 years, but it was the empire, not the destruction of the first temple, Daniel is going, oh my gosh, I know what's happened here. Leviticus 26:18, this 7-fold curse has been launched, which means the exile is not going to be 70 years now, but the exile instead is going to be 490 years. Now you understand why the angel Gabriel is going to be dealing with a 490-year period. The correction the angel Gabriel is going to make when he approaches Daniel later on in the chapter in verse 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27, that's how the chapter ends, is that when you begin the count of the 490 years, and most importantly, Jeremiah 29, verse 10, which means the return of the Jews, you start counting Lechorvot Yerushalayim, from the destruction of Jerusalem, not from the beginning of the Babylonian Empire. Okay, so Daniel is thinking, he has a Torah in front of him. The Torah says that your exile could be, your punishment can be multiplied 7 times. And what proceeds from Daniel 9, verse 3, all the way through 16, 17, is Daniel pleading to God not to allow the curse of Moses to be employed here. He cries and begs HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be his name. He begs him and confesses his sins and the sins of the nation. In fact, we learn many laws of prayer and how to pray from this ecstatic prayer that Daniel conveys to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a deeply moving prayer. It's such a moving prayer that even Hashem, who sent Gabriel, held him back till when Daniel finished. Daniel was praying with such fervor, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved Daniel very much. He was called Chamud, beloved. It's completely unique. Daniel was so beloved by Hashem that Hashem hears such an ecstatic prayer that Hashem, that's why Gabriel, when he first approaches Daniel, he says, from the beginning of your prayer I was sent forth, but he was held back. Let me just hear the whole thing. It's really... Let me tell you something, my friend. You learn Daniel, mamash swoon, you fall in love with Hashem. You can lose your mind. So, it's so, mili mayusa. Really, if you study and you go deep, 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 you go very, very high, high, high. That's all I could tell you. I could tell you. Just there's not an extra word here. So that's, my friend, the reason why Daniel 9 begins in the first year of Darius the Mede. Because Darius the Mede is, let's say, the Medo-Persia Empire, that he comes in right before Cyrus. There is no Cyrus yet. So number one, Daniel is going, it's true that we have a prophecy about Cyrus, but the problem is that we very much may be in a predicament where the punishment, 70 years, has been multiplied by 7, which means 490 years. The second part is not as plain, but there isn't. Cyrus hadn't emerged yet. Cyrus is a name, a Persian name of leaders. It's not like his name was Cyrus, like your name is Henry. It's just like kind of like Caesar or Cleopatra. I don't know how many. I think we have nearly 30 people named Cleopatra in history. So Cyrus is a royal name, a Persian royal name, and therefore it wouldn't have registered. It registers for Cyrus, as you see in the opening passages of of the book of Ezra. The book of Ezra begins with Cyrus declaring that God spoke to him and gave him a revelation, and Cyrus had the ability to fulfill that promise because he saw his name there. In fact, why would Cyrus tell the Jews, go back to your land? Why would he say that at all? What happened? I mean, Cyrus wasn't a religious Jew. He wasn't Jewish. He probably was a Zoroastrian. I'm not sure what his religion was. But whatever it is, Cyrus says that the God of the Jews, read Ezra's opening, I have a revelation from God. When did Cyrus become a Navi? He didn't. He had Isaiah's prophecy, Isaiah 45. That's why the people who question the integrity of the entire book of Isaiah are kicking out the legs of history. They can't explain Ezra 1. Let me tell you, my friends, this is music, but you got to put it together. This is just, your mind will never be the same if you absorb all this. So the first reason is he had Leviticus. That tells us I could very much delay it. And the name Cyrus would not have been significant in that it's this Cyrus, because that's a royal name. And therefore, in Daniel's mind, it's not that Daniel would have even known Cyrus, because Cyrus didn't emerge as king. Remember, there's an intermediate period from the time the last Babylonian king is deposed and the Babylonian Empire falls until Cyrus the Great emerges. That's a period of, let's say, 10, 11 months. In that interim period, it's Darius the Mede who stands as leader. So we don't have a Cyrus yet. But Cyrus was a well-known Persian royal name. But for all Daniel knew, he didn't know what was going on. What was Cyrus' position? Which Cyrus? Who would be the one who would emerge? All he had was Leviticus, and what he had, very importantly, is no movement. The words that I will restore you to this place, those are the last words of Jeremiah 29 verse 10, didn't occur. He then puts it together, the word, I'll just say this last piece. The word divarai, my word, when you see the word my word, I know you read these words as though my word is some nice King James Jacobean English kind of fancy schmancy term. It isn't. The word divari, that only appears in Jeremiah 29 verse 10. It does not appear in Jeremiah 25:12. It does not mean my word like in a conventional sophomoric pedestrian sense at all. My word means a word of prophecy. It means my promise. That is why if you go to Daniel chapter 9 verse 2, it says there to fill the word of Hashem. Why did it use the same exact word, divari, as in Jeremiah? Not only that, we're going higher. Open up Ezra chapter 1. If you look this up, if you read Hebrew, you're going to mamish go flying. Mamish, you're flying. If you absorb this, you'll cancel every therapist appointment you're ever going to have in your life, because you're going to feel so secure in your faith in Hashem. If you open up Ezra chapter 1, read just the opening passage. That means Ezra 1:1. Ezra is not introduced in the book of Ezra until chapter 7. Side note. It says, how does it begin? And the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, at the completion of the word, Devar. There it is. So the word here, Devar or Divari, that doesn't mean conventional, a word like I said something. It means the promise of prophecy that must be fulfilled. And you can now, we just triangulated. We triangulated from Jeremiah 29 verse 10 to Ezra chapter 1 verse 1 to Daniel 9 verse 2. But what Daniel had a lot to be afraid of because of a miscalculation. It's not that Daniel did not receive prophecy on this. And therefore, there are times, this may surprise you, that there were Nevi'im Nevi'im, the prophets, were the greatest men and women who ever lived. But when they were not in a state of prophecy, when the source of information about the history of the Jewish people and destiny of the Jewish people was not received from God, they were asked questions, and at times what they thought, God had to correct it. There are many examples of this. It's not that the prophets were wrong. They just, if they did not receive their information, Kayamar Hashem, but they did it based on their own calculation of what they thought. So you look at 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse. The prophet thought that David should go build a temple, and told David, go ahead and build it. God came to him and said, stop it. So Daniel thought this, it was logical to him, but essentially I'm unpacking it. The time to begin counting the 490 years, that's 70 for the exile, the Babylonian exile, and 420 for the Second Temple period, total of 490, before a Messianic period can even begin, is what is launched, what is conveyed by the angel Gabriel to the prophet Daniel. That, whoever you are who asked that question, you know your stuff, you studied well, and thank you so much for joining us on air.
Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, this is Steve from Brooklyn. How are you all?
Steve,
how's everything going?
Welcome.
Great. First of all, Rabbi, you look great. I'm going to send you an email. You got to tell me how you lost all that weight. I need some help with that. So that's A. Okay. B, here's my question, and this has been brewing in my mind for years, and I've just formulated it now. So in Christian theology, Satan is an independent agent that God has to contend with. And we've proven in many cases that's not true. However, in studying the book of Genesis, specifically the section in Genesis, the first section, it talks about Nephilim. So according to Talmudic sources in Yoma, it talks about two angels, I forget their names, that were thrown out of heaven because they rebelled. So do you think that Christians got their version of Satan because they had proof, or they had a thought that maybe angels could rebel? And how could angels rebel anyway? Aren't angels a manifestation of God's will? So how can an angel rebel or do anything but what God wants them to do? Thank you. That's my question. Is it clear?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, Stephen, thank you, brother, for calling in.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Hey,
Thanks.
you too.
Yes, this is a very good question, and I address it in another show that I did a few weeks ago, but I'll quickly address it now. Satan, the job of this angel Satan is to seduce men away from God, cast forth his blandishments to all of humanity in order to give man free will. If Satan didn't exist, free will would be impossible because virtue would be impossible. You can't be tested unless you have something pulling you in the other direction. The source in Christianity that Satan is intrinsically malevolent, he is intrinsically evil, has nothing to do with any Talmud or Medrash. I'll cover that in a moment. Its source is dualism. Dualism was a kind of thinking that was ensconced in Zoroastrianism, but that's not the. Dualism was an idea that was permeated the religions of the ancient world. Dualism means that there are essentially two divine forces, at least two. There were many who believed there were hundreds and hundreds of divine forces like this, hundreds of them. And we know from Islamic literature that in Mecca there were hundreds of these, all sort of demons and so on. Prior to the advent of Islam, we know the Gnostics believed in hundreds and hundreds of these. But the point is that the ancient world wasn't crazy. If you have no Torah and you don't have the heart of Abraham, so what you observe in your life are, please God, many wonderful things in your life, but chas v'chalila, it shouldn't happen, but there are some things that are not so good, and they seem inexplicable. We see people behaving really well, and we see some people who are mamish completely evil. And we don't. It's hard to. We see just competing forces in the world, and what it appears to us is that it must be there are multiple deities working here. So Christianity invented nothing; it borrowed everything, and it borrowed this heavily. The idea of the Antichrist, which is in many places in the Christian Bible, it's by name in the first two epistles of John and Second Thessalonians and Revelation. The idea is that there's an angel, a divine type of being, who was the highest of all angels, and it went into rebellion against God because of his pride. This has nothing at all to do. There's nothing like that. On the contrary, in Tanakh, Satan does whatever God tells him to do. That's all. Satan has a job, which means once he's programmed, he might bring a case before God and say, look at this guy Job. He's very righteous, but maybe if he wasn't so wealthy and successful, maybe he wouldn't be righteous. So he's given permission to do what God instructs him to do, but not take the life of Job. As an example, Satan might bring Yehoshua ben Yehoitzadok, the first high priest of the Second Temple, before God because he had dirty clothes, which really means that his son intermarried, which we find in Ezra chapter 10, verse 18. But that's all he can do. He is malach means messenger. The word angel, in fact, in Latin, the same thing. It means messenger. He cannot operate independently. Okay. So the caller asked the question, but we have a Gemara, we have a Talmud, we have more than a Talmud, we have a Medrash. And essentially, first of all, what I've explained to you is very, very simple. So now we come to Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1, I'm going to just frame it for you. It introduces us to the sins that permeated the world that man was engaged in. And in fact, we're introduced to Nephilim. Nephil means to fall. Bnei Elohim, sons of God. It doesn't mean sons of God. It means powerful people of enormous stature who had seized women against their will and forced them to have their children, raping women and forcing them to bear their children. Okay? That's what's going on here. Now, just so you understand, Tanakh does not use our vernacular. So when Psalm says Havul Hashem b'nei Elim, it's the same words. It means the sons of the mighty. That's all it means. Judges in Exodus chapter 21 and 22, they're called God, but they're not God. They're people who are, in that case, representing, teaching, or God's law. I can go through this, but don't dare impose idioms and linguistic conventions onto Tanakh, or you are going to be lost. You are fried. You're gone. You might say it's not convenient. You have to go back to the Hebrew and study it properly. Okay, can't go all those sources. It's everywhere, all over the place. Okay, and this is what people do. People read texts and they like they're reading, I don't know, a newspaper. I don't even know what, and they think that Tanakh is using their One thing I don't think I ever said to you, and that is, this is really important. I don't think I ever said publicly. So, besides all the problems that translators do, even well-meaning Jewish everybody does this. That means the Christian translations are corrupt completely, but all translators try to make a text readable. Hebrew and English are languages of two different species, two different families. I mean, really different. This is not Portuguese and Spanish or Italian and English where there's a relationship. They're just completely unrelated. And the problem is, if you translate Hebrew word for word, just take each word and put the meaning of that word, it wouldn't make any sense. And therefore, the translator has to add the words in English and any Indo-European language in order so that you can understand what they're even saying. Because in Hebrew, it just reads really, really different. Just right now, take my word for it. Moreover, translators want their translations to be published and people to like them. So they want to write well in a way that reads easy. And therefore, they will complement the text. They will add all sorts of words or selectively adjust and not use the proper exact meaning of a word because it doesn't read well. And that's why people like the easy reading Bibles. But there is a trade-off. This is true for everybody. There are certain translations that are more closer to there's no such thing as a word for it. If you word for word translate Hebrew to English, that doesn't exist. People use that term about the American Standard Version. It's not even close. But there are translations which really go for the easy reading to make it pleasant to read. Okay? And therefore, more compromise is necessary in the language. Okay, this is really very simple. Okay, so Tanakh, not only is it a problem of linguistics, it's an issue of convention. Tanakh uses idioms that we would never use in a million years today. No one talks that way. You better know how Tanakh speaks and not how people speak, or you are gone. Just sign off and go. You're done. You're fried, and you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. One other caveat, I don't think I ever said also. Jews read the original Hebrew. I mean religious Jews. My Tanakh is all Hebrew. With all the commentary, it's all Hebrew. That's how religious Jews are all raised that way. Unless someone becomes religious as an adult or converts to Judaism, in every Jewish school, 5-year-old, 3-year, whatever it is, 6 years old, they're learning Hebrew and they're reading it right straight from the Chumash, right from the Hebrew text. There's no English text. No, there was no English when we were kids. It was all Hebrew, and that was the end of it. Okay, so it's easier, in a way. It's easier for obviously for a religious Jew to get what I'm saying because the English-speaking religious Jew gets all this, but everyone else, this is what? Okay. Now we can go to the Talmud, and there's a midrashim on this. So we are told in this rabbinic literature. I want to just say right from the get-go that I don't believe these stories happened, but they're parables. And there is a parable like this, and Rashi, in fact, quotes this. He quotes both in his commentary, and he quotes this as well. And that is that there were angels who were observing the debacle of mankind. It wasn't like everything was great until Genesis chapter 6. History was going on, and it wasn't going well at all. What happens? So we're told that 2 angels come before God. They're not evil or malevolent at all. They simply ask God, could you make us human and we will succeed where humans failed? Okay. God, we are told, this is not in the Bible at all. God, we are then told, grants their acquiesces to their request, and they become human beings. That means they're not angels anymore. That's the whole point. And the next point is they fail utterly. They completely fail, and they are these people. Now, I want to repeat again because some people are just not familiar with this genre of literature where you have this kind of parabolic use of storytelling, but this is Midrashim and Talmud full of it. You don't have to believe this occurred. I don't. I think the consensus it is purely a parable. It is not heretical to think this actually is a historical event. If you wish to, you can. It doesn't make a difference. The question is, why we told the story. So, first of all, we have no angels rebelling against God. This is the key. The angels are made into human beings and cease to be angels. As human beings, then they can fail, then they can rebel because they're no longer angels. That's the point. Go back to the text. But why is the story told? It's likely a parable, but what am I supposed to do with this story? Like, how does this play? The reason why these can't be angels that raped women is because in the flood, the bad people were killed. So angels don't drown. They don't need to breathe a gas mixture that contains 21% oxygen. So it would be preposterous for angels to have been the ones, because they been the ones perpetrating the first crime of Genesis 6, because they didn't get killed. That would be psycho. So that's outrageous. The question is, what's the takeaway from this? The takeaway is very simple. Listen carefully. That is that by what means are you created in the image of God? How did that happen? At what stage in your career did God breathe into your nostrils, if he ever did? And the answer is he didn't. He breathed into the nostrils of Adam Harishon, the first Adam. She, Eve, his wife, was created from a part of him and therefore received the both physical and spiritual properties of Adam, and they're both called Adam. I want to take you to Genesis 5, where we are given the descendants of Adam to Noah and his sons. And what's very critical is we are told in chapter 5, verse 3, exactly how Seth was created in the image of God. Like, how did that happen? Because every human being, this is not a Jew, Gentile, every person is created in the image of God. And what that means is that in you is a spark of the divine, a neshama, which is a part of God. It's a divine, eternal spark. Every person has it. No animal has it. Therefore, no animal ever believed in God, and 95% of humans believe in God. 5% are still in a hangover from the 18th century. But humans, their disposition is to believe in God. Unless you go and you're brainwashed in universities in England and Western Europe. But aside from that, the default baseline is you're going to believe in God. The question then becomes is, at what stage in my life did God breathe into my nostrils? The answer is God didn't. Not mine, not yours. And how then do I have that spark? And the answer is that I am created in the B'Tselem, in the image of Adam, in the image of my parents, who are their parents. All of us are built on Adam. And this is literally in the text. If you look at Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, and Adam lived 130 years, and he begot a son. Look at the next words. In his likeness. Who's the his? His is not God. His is Adam. So that pronoun is referring to who? It's referring to Adam's likeness. So Shes, his son, received the demus, the Tselem Elokim from Adam, not directly from God. And it's passed on from generation to generation. And therefore, and after his image, and named him Seth. Explicitly, Genesis 5, verse 3. And therefore, now think. Here's the rub. And this is what our sages using this parable are trying to illustrate. If the angels come to God in Genesis 6 and say to God, make us human beings, means give us a human form. We're no longer angels. We become angels, and we could succeed where others have failed, and they fail. What are we to learn from that? What didn't they get? think. If angels are turned into humans, what did they not receive? They are not descendants of Adam. If they're not descendants of Adam, then they're not created in the image of Adam, as Seth was, and therefore they don't have a chance. Noah, he not only had a chance, was this week's Parsha, Noah was a great man, and he lived in a vicious neighborhood. So to be great in a bad neighborhood is even quite a great thing. Noah lived in a really bad neighborhood, and he managed to do it. But Noah was created in the image of Adam. These angels, would they have been created in the image of Adam? The answer is no. And the purpose of the parable is not to tell us what the plain meaning is. Not what it is. The purpose of the parable is to show us that the only chance we have to choose God and to be faithful is to be created in the image of God by being created in the image of Adam through our parents. So that's a great question, Steve. You got to study these parables very, very carefully, because if you read a story in midrashic type literature, in Agadata, that's what it's called, and you don't like, why am I told this story? Why am I getting this parable? And you don't know why, it means you don't get it at all, zero. And I encourage those of you who study these parables, the point is that without being created in the Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, through what? The Tselem of Adam, in the image of Adam, you can't succeed. That's the whole point of the parable. So that's why these texts need to be studied very carefully. They require enormous commentary, because in truth, our sages of Blessed Mary were just geniuses, and they would say something, and you're going, well, what do you mean? And it would be like, sometimes I do this on YouTube. I watch, like, you can watch a professor at MIT teaching quantum physics. Try it. Go YouTube, quantum physics, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the finest in the world, right? And all the kids are all geniuses there. I've lectured there. Believe me, they're very smart. And you start listening to a professor's lecture, and within 10 seconds, unless you have a very strong background in math and physics, you don't know what he's even talking about, right? In order to get into MIT, you have to be a genius and have a tremendous science background. You can't even get in. So therefore, that's what our sages are doing. They leave out all sorts of information. They don't explain delta and all these. They don't explain that because it is assumed that you already understand it. Thank you for your question. Let's move on.
Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
This is Michael Purdue from Louisiana.
Welcome, Michael.
Rabbi Singer, I have a question concerning Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 6, the time of Jacob's trouble. And I've heard you explain this a few times, but just to get some clarity, I've heard other rabbis say that the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, have not been restored yet. That will happen in the Messianic age. But Jacob's trouble is really addressing all of Israel. Is that correct?
Just yes. Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Because I've heard you say that the Shoah was the time of Jacob's trouble, and yes. I'm just wondering, how was all Israel affected by that?
Okay, that's a very, 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 and I'm not going to say more varies, because that's enough varies from one caller. That's all you're entitled to. That's a very good question.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and hang up. Michael, thank you for your call. Go ahead and hang up now, and you continue for your answer.
Thank you.
Hey, Rabbi, would you do me a favor and just repeat the question, just in case the viewers couldn't hear the caller very clearly?
So the passage in question here actually is Jeremiah 30, verse 7. So Jeremiah, this is where Jeremiah breaks away from dealing with a contemporaneous problem of false prophets, advising the Jews very poorly, to messianic explosion. And this is going to continue for quite a number of chapters. Okay? In Jeremiah 30, verse 7, the Navi says, Hoy ki gadol hayom hahu me'ayin kamahu. Hoy means literally, whoa. Now, Jeremiah lived in a horrible time. He witnessed and was exiled. He witnessed destruction of the first temple. So Jeremiah is saying, we're not talking about this. There is a day coming, there's a day coming that there is nothing like it. Yaakov, and it'll be a time of tribulation to Jacob. That means there's a day coming, and it's the worst possible event in all of Israel, Israel's history. Umimena, but from that event, Yivashea, will come your redemption. So very, very famous. So there are multiple, so the question is asked, we are living in a time when the 10 northern tribes, which means really 9.5 tribes, are not with us. This is how the question would be framed. And the only part of the nation that survived the Assyrian exile of Sancherib, which was terminated in the 14th year of Hezekiah, was the tribe of Judah, which I'm not a part of. My great-grandmother was. The tribe of Levi, that's my tribe. They were in the southern kingdom. And Chatzi Shevet Binyamin, part of the tribe of Benjamin. The rest of the Jews were carried off to places unknown. Now, here's where we can get ourselves into trouble. The term Jacob, Israel, Jews, even though the word really refers to Jew, as an example, refers to those of Judah, but because of a prophecy in Genesis 49, verse 8, that all your brothers will praise you, which means they'll all call themselves after you, we find in Tanakh many times where Israel or the Jews, people are called the Jews, and they're just from the tribe of Benjamin. As an example, Mordechai. Mordechai in the book of Esther was an Ishiyamini. He was the tribe of Benjamin, but he was called Yehudi, a Jew. So these types of words are not to be taken in a hyper literal way, but to be understood that it's referring to the children of Israel, the history of the children of Israel. That's a really simple answer, but I want to go deep. I want to go a little bit deeper. And that is that, as it turns out, that what I had said to you earlier, that 9.5 tribes were carried off by the Assyrian Empire, and the only survivors was Yehuda, Levi, and part of the tribe of Benjamin, is not really correct, although everyone talks that way. It's not really historically correct. What do I mean it's not really historically correct? We are told explicitly at the end of 2nd Chronicles that a great number, we don't know the number, of Jews who were in the northern kingdom. Remember, in the northern kingdom means that after the death of King Solomon, so his son Rehoboam became king, and it caused a split, and there was a civil, I'm going to say it was a civil war, but they weren't always fighting each other, but they frequently did. There were the nation was divided into 2 kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and then the southern kingdom. Okay? So now, just so you know, the cutoff line essentially is about where Jerusalem is. Jerusalem is like right kind of center, right there, like the belly button of the land. So basically north, which means Samaria, that's the northern part of Israel, that's where all these various tribes lived. In the south, you had Judah, and of course you had Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, where the Levium served. I mean, Kohanim, I'm a Kohen, so that's my tribe. But what did the northern kingdom do? They did not want Jews in the north to go to Jerusalem. Why not? Not because it was occupied territory, it was just the opposite. They knew that if Jews would go to Jerusalem, go south, and the Temple Mount sits really on 2 tribes, right at the border of Judah and Benjamin. Why beyond the scope of this show? Because they knew that if they're going to go see the southern kingdom and see Yerushalayim and see the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, this is the first temple period, Solomon's temple, their hearts would grow warm, and they would, what do they call it? Like when people from North Korea, they would escape. They wouldn't want to stay there. So don't ask what was done in the north to keep Jews from going south. They built idols. They built altars that mimicked the altar in the temple. In fact, we've discovered them in Dan. We have it. We literally have it. I gave a lecture at one of those fake altars, meaning it's an authentic altar, but it was done in order to keep the Jews in the north happy that, I'm all right. But did it work? So we're told explicitly at the end of Tanakh that in fact it was not a very successful endeavor, and in fact many of the northern tribes said, I'm out of here, and they came down. So here's the real truth. Conventionally we say the 10 tribes are gone, but they're not. Among Klal Yisrael, among the known Jews that are here today, are a great significant part of all the tribes are already among us. From here. Why? Because they escaped the north and came south. And we have it openly in Tanakh that they did this. This is not like it's there. So therefore, the northern kingdom was losing a lot of people who were jumping over the border, and they were welcome, but they came here to the low part of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it is not correct to say that there aren't representative of all tribes among us, but we all call ourselves Jews, or the children of Israel, the children of Jacob, he's our father. This is real, we, for whatever reason, people don't study Chronicles. And without that, you're going to be lost. What am I going to say to you, my dear brother? You're like just not going to read half the Bible and think that you could know. So, and people call the 10 lost tribes, but it's just a misnomer. And moreover, we know that all of them are all the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, Bnei Yaakov, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. They all have a covenant of restoration, and we are connected. You know how connected we are? Go to Ezekiel 37. Famous. Why? It's the valley of dry bones. And what is Ezekiel told to do? He says, take 2 sticks. One of it write Judah and his companions. The other one write Ephraim and his companions. That represents the northern and the southern kingdom. Put both. So imagine you have 2 ends of a stick, 2 sticks. You put your hand around the 2 ends and then open your hands and it becomes 1 stick. This is not Copperfield. It's not a magic show in Ezekiel. What God is saying is that you're all one. You're bound by a historical covenant that will go to the Messianic age. And therefore, when Jeremiah is addressing Klal Yisrael, he doesn't refer to just Judah and Levi. In fact, Tanakh never does that. It's almost, you will almost never find any passage in Tanakh where post-Hezekiah, meaning post-Assyria, just, you and you, but not you. There's certainly no Messianic prophecy like that. There's a lot of discussion of the destruction of the northern kingdom. A lot. Because Judah is warned. You saw what happened. So therefore, that's why it says in the pasuk, "Hay ki gadol hayom hahu me'ayin k'mayu ki eisar hi liYaakov u'mimena yivosheya." So really, all the tribes are here, and more are coming in, and Jews are coming from India, and they're coming from North Africa, and they're coming from all over. But we are all one nation together, and our destiny is unfolding before our eyes. May we merit to see the coming of the true Mashiach. Thank you for that great question. You probably want to segue now and just say nice things about me.
You know, I love your hair. You remind me of...
This is unbelievable.
Pepe Le Pew? No, I'm just kidding. You got that silver... Pepe Le Pew's got that silver streak.
I love that French skunk.
No, isn't he
When I
awesome?
was a kid, Pepe Le Pew was
That's
like a
awesome.
hero.
That is hilarious.
I don't remember the cartoon very well. You know, when I was a kid, I loved cartoons so much. I remember the thought. It's one of the earliest thoughts that I ever had. I remember thinking that if I could just spend my life, I don't know, let's say I'm 5 years old. If I could just spend my life watching Bugs Bunny and Pepe Le Pew and whoever else was there, I'd be a very happy fellow.
That's funny.
I don't know why. You know what's funny is because now you can go on YouTube or you can be flying. You know, I did a lot of flying, and they have these little TV screens where you can watch all sorts of shows, and they have these old cartoons sometimes, and they have old I Love Lucy and Father Knows Best and Lost in Space, things from really these are old shows. And now as an adult watching it, sometimes you're just taking a break from something and you go, geesh, I don't even know why. Like, it seemed today, when I watched those cartoons, they seem, and compared to what they're doing with animation today, forget about it. It seemed so, but as a kid, it's unbelievable that this was it. People Up Here was I don't remember what his job was. I just know he was a French-speaking skunk that loved to drink wine.
That was funny. I remember that as a kid, too.
Yeah. And you want to know another thing that's very funny? I'll tell you just quickly.
Okay.
It's going off topic here, but it's okay. So Pepe Le Pew, I say he was French with a French name. He loved to drink wine, I believe. And I remember, it used to be that today kosher wines are, winning awards all over the world for the quality of the wines. But this was not the case when I was a kid. They had just like whatever, David, whatever they had, I don't remember, Manischewitz, and it basically tasted like cough medicine. I just, and I didn't know, like no one explained that the non-Jews are not drinking this, they're drinking their own stuff, and their stuff tastes considerably, I didn't know there was anything else. I just knew there was David, whatever was, I forgot the name of the wine, and there was Manischewitz, and there was Kedem, but it was very, very, there was sweetened, just heavily sweetened, and don't ask. And it really just, so I remember wondering when watching People Up Here, and plus you would see it in like I Love Lucy or whatever, someone would be drinking a glass of wine. I don't have whatever, in those old shows that were, so people would like make a whole deal about wine, and they would clean their glass. Oh, wine, ooh, give a look at the wine. I'm going, why are you interested in wine? It's like, it was like there's so many other things that it really tastes. I thought it was awful. So, anyways, there's a little break. So go ahead.
Okay, no, you're good. Okay, so guys, the phone line's open. Number's on your screen, 855-952-4253. Just remember it's 855-95-BIBLE. It's the best way to remember it if it's not on the screen. So feel free to call in with your questions. And I'm going to take you right now to Rabbi Tovia Singer's Magnifico work, 2-volume book set available at Amazon. Actually, go to his website, outreachjudaism.org, to order them. It's better that way. And so we do have a caller now. Let's go ahead and take this caller. Caller, you are live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hey, Rabbi Singer. This is Michael Perdue again from Baton Rouge.
Hey, what's up, man?
I have a question concerning the virgin birth and why Islam believes in the virgin birth. I understand that they don't draw the same conclusion that Christians do. We all know that the text was altered in Isaiah. But why do they get this assumption when it's written in the Quran? Why do they believe it?
Yeah. So
was it something?
That's a very interesting question, and thank you, and I'm going to answer that.
Okay, Michael, go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for your
Okay, thank you. All right.
All right.
So obviously, we have no other texts from the 7th century to tell us anything. I don't have sources that no one else does. I don't have like secret manuscripts that no one else does. So it's correct that the Quran states explicitly that Isa which is Jesus, was not just a prophet, but he was a Rasul, which is the highest order of prophets, and that he was born to a Virgin Mary. And in fact, Mary is extolled, and there's a whole surah in her name in the Quran. And Mary is really she is presented even in a way that's higher level than Luke's infancy narrative, where Mary already is presented to us as a high level. I don't have sources for that, so I can't comment on it. What I would mean, when I'm on air, I tell you what I know. I can't make up stuff. You don't need me to do that. But here's what's interesting about Muslims or the Quran and Islamic literature. The point is, they don't do what the Christians do. They don't make up and say it's based on Isaiah. That's what's important. Muslims believe that Jesus, who was a Rasul, a prophet, a high order prophet, and his role was to bring a Sharia, which means a message. It's not really what the word means, but that's how it's understood. It's a message, which means his own book, a message, and essentially that message was for the Jews to keep the Torah and for the Jews to follow God's will. He's not the Son of God or any of those things in Islam. But the key is that the Quran and Muslims are not dumb. They know that the Christians raped Isaiah 7:14 in Matthew 1:23, and they continue to hang on to that. And so people often remark about Judaism and Islam having very, very striking similarities. Anyone studying the both obviously is struck by the similarities. Muslims have not missed this part. Okay, everyone has. And to the credit of Islamic writers is that they did not go, and it's based to fulfill what was written by the prophet. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel, Matthew 1:23. That's a lie. So if Muslims believe, based on their faith, because Muslims believe the Quran is the word of God, so that's it, but they don't engage in the criminal behavior. I know I'm using strong words, but this needs to be said. Muslims do not believe that Jesus was born of a virgin because of Matthew 1:23, or because of Luke, or because of the proto-gospel of James. No, they believe it because the Quran says it. Fine. Just don't be, the big problem we have with the Christian world is don't play with Tanakh. Don't make up stuff. Don't change and don't corrupt it. So I don't have access to manuscripts. I don't have access to that. But what I can tell you is Islam did not go to Tanakh and say, we're going to change the meaning of Isaiah. In fact, Isaiah, who Muslims all believe was a prophet, is never mentioned in the entire Quran. There are many prophets mentioned in the Quran. Not all, but almost all of them were Jewish. Almost all of them. But Muslims universally consider Yeshayahu, Isaiah, a prophet. They all do. It's not in the Quran. So they don't call the Quran. So that's the point I can bring out. The point is, they know, and they're not idiots. And not only that, Arabic and Hebrew are very, very close. They're Semitic languages that are very, very well related. And that's the point to focus on, in my view. Thank you very much for your question. And William, yes. I wish you a refuah shalema.
Yes.
And thank you all for tuning in to this broadcast. I really enjoyed it.
One second there, Rabbi. Okay, here we go. Let me